Hi, everyone. How are you today? I am here with Dr. Camden, and I am super, super excited about doing this today. We're actually doing it on a live platform, different than the normal. And I'm very excited about that because usually when I have tried to do Facebook Lives with other people who have Facebook pages, there is always some kind of technical drama.
Really?
So we are doing it differently this time. Camden, I'm so glad you're here.
Yes. Thanks
And
for
I've been
talking with
looking
me.
forward to this.
Yeah, I'm glad we could do this.
Me too. I have been loving reading your book.
Thank you.
And I know we're doing this on the 27th of September, but it's going to stay up on my Facebook page so people may watch it later. If you are watching right now, this is a great time to press share and pass this on to anyone else. Hi, I see you. How are you? I want to start by just letting you share about your book
hmm
and about your motivation for writing Recovering from Purity Culture. Do you have a paper copy? Because I don't yet. So show us the paper copy. There we go. Recovering from Purity Culture. Hang tight right there because I am absolutely going to grab a screenshot of this.
Okay.
There we go. I got it. Tell me more about the motivation for writing this book.
hmm Okay. Yeah, my motivation, I got the idea for the book several years ago. I got married in 2016, and it was pretty much the next year that I thought about this idea because I was working
Mm-hmm.
with clients who I was seeing were just really very unprepared for marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I had the advantage of getting married after I became a psychologist and I got like professional training in sex education and sex
Yeah.
therapy in school. Um, but of course, most people don't get that. And so I
Right.
thought people are really unprepared. And I was seeing people just struggling with a lot of shame from purity culture. And then I
Mm-hmm.
looked back at my own faith experience through my 20s when I had been single and struggling with the false promises of purity culture that didn't come true for me. And I realized purity culture was largely responsible for the doubts and that I went through in my faith journey and through that what I now would call a deconstruction that I went through of my faith. And it seemed like I'm
You know,
not
some
the
people
only
hate
one.
that word.
I
Some
know.
people really hate that word.
Some people hate that word, but really it was a time of rethinking my beliefs and
Mm-hmm.
struggling with some doubts and also some anger towards God, being able to share that with him and express that and just kind of wrestle with the universal question of when things in my life don't turn out the way I expected or don't turn out the way that I was promised, what does that mean about God's goodness and if he's trustworthy? Yeah, so realizing that a lot of the problems that I experienced in my faith were directly caused by purity culture, all of that got me thinking and gave me the motivation to start doing my research and listening to what was already being said about purity culture. Back when I got the idea in 2017, I think the book Pure was published in like 2018. So that was one of like the
Mm-hmm.
first kind of breakout books about purity culture. And
Right.
so the conversation was kind of starting. And then I started writing online in 2020 about it. And yeah, all of that just gave me more and more confirmation that this is causing a lot of problems, unintended and unanticipated
Mm-hmm.
problems for a lot of us. And this is something that I feel like I can address in a different way than has already been addressed by a lot of the other books that are out there because I have the personal experience and the
Right.
professional experience as a psychologist, and I'm still a Christian. And that was a perspective that's not always present in the books.
Yes, that's really a three-way
hmm
reality
hmm
that you have with this book that's very unique. And I
hmm
happen to be a survivor and not a counselor, but a coach. So I work
hmm
with a lot of people on that same untangling journey
hmm
in different ways than you would as a psychologist, but hearing a lot of those stories.
Yeah.
And I'm in that same kind of triangle box.
Yeah.
Triangles are not boxes, but whatever.
Yeah.
Where I went through that journey. I am still a dedicated and devoted follower of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I still believe that sex belongs inside marriage,
Mm-hmm.
as not in a judgmental, I
Mm-hmm.
think you're going to hell if you've ever done something outside of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I think you're damaged goods or anything along
Mm-hmm.
those shame-driven things that we grew up with. But
Yeah.
I believe God created the ideal to be inside safe, protected, loving, committed, lifelong relationships. And so you and I share that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people who don't believe that anymore,
Right. Mm-hmm.
or they've landed somewhere else on the spectrum. And I respect that we all have different journeys, but
Yeah, same. I feel the same way. Like I respect the process that they've gone through. And sometimes when you read people's experiences, it makes sense that they've landed in a different place than me. And
yep.
that's valid for sure. But I just didn't see myself in a lot of the books and a lot of the stories that were out there on purity culture. A lot of them seem to either have still a pretty traditional perspective on gender roles or kind of reinforce, put a spin on some of the purity culture myths and reinforce them in a different way. Or if they went the opposite direction, they were by people who maybe no longer claimed to be Christians or no longer held on to that sexual ethic. And so I just thought this doesn't resonate with me, or I don't find myself here. And so that also gave me like a different perspective that I wanted to bring to the topic.
Right. So I have enjoyed pre-reading your manuscript, and I have a bunch of things that I have it on my phone because I have the Kindle pre-reader version, not the physical version yet, although I'm really looking forward to that because I scribble in my margins. I am very much a hands on my book. Write in all the margins, highlight, mark it up, put comments and stuff in it. You could probably get a really crazy window into my brain if you read the books after me that I have really enjoyed reading. So I'm sure I will do that when I get your copy that I ordered. But between now and then, I had marked some things that I thought were really cool. And I know that over the last 10 years, I remember when the Harvey Weinstein thing first went down. And a friend of mine asked me, he had a radio show, and he asked me to come on as a guest to talk about this whole phenomenon of women coming forward about this bizarre stories. And he specifically started out the radio thing, the show, talking about how he wanted to catch this because he felt it was an important topic before the next news cycle, because we knew it wasn't going to last more than a couple of weeks. And here we are nearly 10 years, just years and years later.
Wow.
And it was not a flash in the pan. It was the beginning of a reformation.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the beginning of a reckoning.
Yes, I like that word better, actually. But the reckoning, I think, began to lead to kind of a reformation. And one of the reckonings that brought was focusing on building on an ethic of consent.
Yes.
Which we would both agree is incredibly needed. But something that has stood out to me very strongly in your book is that you state unequivocally that an ethic of consent is not enough. Which I thought was fantastic. And I also was not expecting, particularly from, like, I didn't start the book thinking you're going to be talking about how consent isn't enough. So I would love to hear more without me giving away what I've read. What are your thoughts on why is consent not enough? Why do we need more? And what more do we need?
Yeah. Yeah, that is in the chapter on reconstructing your sexual ethic, which is the chapter I didn't want to write because I knew it would be the most controversial chapter in the book, most likely. But yet I felt like when I looked at some of the stories and the books from people coming out of purity culture, it felt like they traded the purity culture's what I call an ethic of shame for this ethic of consent. And what I mean by that is consent is solely the only criteria for one's ethic, that as long as it's legal, meaning like that is the only criteria you need, as long as the adults have consented to whatever the sexual activity or relationship is. And
Right.
yeah, I just saw the topic of consent being addressed, which, like you said, is necessary. And I was glad that that was being brought to the discourse, because when we were growing up in purity culture, that was never even a topic. That was not a word that I even heard. And so I was glad that that was being brought up into the conversation, but it felt like the pendulum swung so far that that was now the only thing we needed in order to make sexual decisions for ourselves. And particularly for Christians, for people who are
Mhm.
still professing to be Christ followers, I just feel like that is insufficient and not enough. I don't see where God, Jesus says in the Bible, yeah, as long as something's legal, that's enough. He always looks at the heart. He always looks deeper at our motivations and
Mhm.
intentions. And I thought there are so many other values we need to consider and take into account for a robust sexual ethic than the
Mhm.
extremes of because the Bible says so, or as long as it's legal, go for it. And I feel like those are the two extremes that we were
Right.
presented with.
I completely agree. And I how directly and without sitting around the issue, you just put it out there and
Mm.
address that topic. And I think that that's something that has been needed in this conversation. I think it's something that's been lacking. And I'm really glad that you talked about it, because it is a piece that has just not gotten a lot of airtime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
because
we
it's
have so many
scary to talk
people.
about it. It's
It is. It
controversial. Yeah.
is.
And that's why it was hard to write this chapter, because you know that you're going to upset people on both extremes, on both sides of the issue. And what I'm proposing, I call, the middle path of a values congruent sexual ethic, where you've really done the work of rethinking your beliefs and your theology and examining your values and doing that work to come up with this sexual ethic that is congruent with your values. And yeah, I feel like that whenever you're trying to offer the middle path, that can be the harder way than just taking, what's already packaged for you and given to you by either purity culture or secular culture.
Absolutely. And this, I'm just dropping a link where everyone can order your book. I'm dropping that into the comments, everybody, so that you can go pre-order her book, because at the time of live recording right now, it is not yet out. It will be shipping out here very shortly. But looping back to that, so I have multiple groups, and between the three main support groups, one's for mamas who are parenting through trauma or post-separation abuse, litigation abuse, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the group for betrayed partners, and they are just trying to figure out what to do with the betrayal trauma. And then I have a group for women who are on the other side of it, and they are ready to think about dating again.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the group. We have like 10,000 women between all three groups, but
Wow.
that is the group where this topic is brought up a
Mm-hmm.
lot,
Mm-hmm.
because all of a sudden, all of the reasons to guard your virginity
Yeah.
from purity culture are useless. You might get pregnant and have a child. Well, I've already got five. What's your point?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to lose your most precious treasure. It's gone.
Mm-hmm.
What does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to possibly get an STD because you might not have safe sex. Well, I'm an adult. I figured out how things work. I can protect against those things now. So all of a sudden, you have women who come from purity culture, and exactly zero of the original reasons to not touch anyone, kiss anyone, make out with anyone, have sex with anyone outside of marriage,
Mm-hmm.
none of those reasons apply. And they're trying to figure out how to rebuild from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad you included that chapter.
Thank you. And yeah, I feel like everything you just said, yeah, that makes so much sense. And that's so valid that like those reasons really don't apply anymore for that group of women. And I would also say the false promises and the positive reasons for waiting don't apply anymore often either. Like, made to feel like this was my duty. Yeah, so I hear that a lot too from the women I coach who are divorced or who are in that position. And that's not my own personal experience. So I was like careful with not being prescriptive of what people need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have a chapter in the book on singleness and sexuality. And in that, I included some interviews
Mm-hmm.
with women who were divorced or women who were widowed because I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to include kind of just the breadth of sexuality, that it's not just about being sexually intimate in a partnered relationship. Like, your sexuality is
Mm-hmm.
a part of you, whether you're partnered or not, whether you're sexually
Right.
active or not. And the work of figuring out your sexual boundaries and your sexual ethic can still apply to you after a divorce or after the loss of a spouse too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, without trying to be prescriptive, I did want to include some of those perspectives and stories and get women thinking more deeply about that.
Right. And I don't think you or I have any right to tell women this is exactly what you must do, but
Mhm.
say these are the questions you can ask yourself.
Right.
Super
Mhm.
helpful. Super,
Mhm.
super helpful.
Yeah, because when I was writing the book, it felt like people don't need another expert telling them what to do. That was what every book I read as a teenager growing up told me, like we don't need another
Right.
pastor, especially a male author, telling us, another expert or another therapist even telling us what choices to make. We need more. I wanted to present more of the how to think about this, what questions to ask yourself, what topics to think through, maybe what sources of truth to explore, and you do the
Mm-hmm.
work yourself of coming to your conclusions and your answers rather than giving you the answer.
I love that. I think that's super useful, especially seeking to empower autonomy
Mhm.
and personal ownership of your own stances. So often for clients, if yours are like mine, who either had that autonomy taken away from it or were
Mhm.
never really empowered with the autonomy that God has for them from the first place.
Right.
I saw myself in so much of your early chapters setting
Mm.
the foundation. I remember reading Passion and Purity at 14.
Mhm.
And honestly, I blame Passion and Purity, Kiss Dating Goodbye, and When God Writes Your Love Story, those three books,
Mm.
for immersing me in expectations of purity culture far more than my own parents, because my parents have always had a very mutually supportive, mutual mutual teamwork, mutual partnership, mutual decision making marriage. They would never call it egalitarian and they wouldn't call it comp either. They just don't
Mhm.
have terms for it. We just talk and we make decisions based on what's best for our family, and we both want what's best for our family, so we just work it out.
Mhm.
And neither of them are driving their own agendas. They never have been, and they've been together 57 years, something like
Oh,
that, like
wow.
forever and ever. Amen. So I grew up thinking that that was normal
Mhm.
for everybody to have parents that didn't fight and calmly talked about things in a home where there was no tension. It was all calm. And everybody,
Wow.
I thought that was normal. I was so naive. But then Passion and Purity and these other books, and going to a Christian high school where the
Mm.
dating tips were like two kids come up front and they both hold their arms out and they would do duct tape around the two kids' arms and then they would
Mhm.
rip it off. And then they would have the guy would stay and another girl would come up and they would wrap the duct tape again and they would rip it off, and this time it didn't hurt so much. And then they would have the third girl come up and rip it off, and this time it was not even sticky. And this is
Mhm.
how you're
Yeah.
damaged, used, teaching yourself to cheat if you date more than one person in your whole life.
Mm.
So that was drilled into me.
Mhm.
And then I ended up marrying into a highly
Mhm.
abusive and unfaithful
Yeah.
and deceptive marriage. So I had a ton to And I was pretty mad at God. Like I did everything right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I punched in the right formula, followed the formula, did the logic,
Mm-hmm.
plugged in all the pieces of the equation. And I loved your story with a couple that said, we didn't have trouble because we didn't do it right. We had trouble because we did everything according to the rules. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Several couples I've worked with call themselves, we were the poster children for purity culture. And now they call themselves purity culture survivors because they see, 20 years after they got married or after they heard these messages, they see that it's caused so much problems in their marriage and in their intimacy and even in their faith. So, yeah, there's a lot of us who have that disillusionment of I followed the rules and I did everything right. And like you said, punched in the formula and this is what I got. And the what
yeah.
then, what now, that feeling of what now, what's left after this. Yeah, that can be
Yeah.
really, there's a lot of grief with that. Okay. And while we're waiting to see if Sarah can reconnect with us, I did want to mention that I interviewed Sarah for the book and interviewed her about purity culture's effect on abuse and how it fosters that. And I published some of my interview with her today on my Substack, which is like a blog newsletter. So you can find that at drcamden.substack.com and look at today's post if you'd like. And the post is called Are Unhealthy Relationships Always Abusive? Yeah, so I'm thankful for her for contributing in that way. So I'm seeing the comments. Thank you for adding comments in there. Sarah said, I think the topic of consent is also really important for within marriage as well. Without purity culture, you're not given the option as a woman to say no. Yeah, absolutely. Consent applies before and after, and all phases of a relationship, mutual consent, and definitely that has been ignored in the church and in Christian purity culture has definitely ignored that and misused scripture to even say that consent is not necessary. So appreciate you mentioning that. Talked about the concept of consent within marriage is important as well. So we were talking about that. And then I also
I see
directed them
that.
to my
I see that.
Substack to the article that I put out today which was my interview with you for the book.
Oh, okay. Oh, yay. Cool. Thank you. So, yeah, anyone who has a question for Dr. Camden, go ahead and drop it in the comments. And she's happy. We're both happy to talk about any questions or comments that you have. One of the things that I want you and anyone who's listening and wondering like what is included in your book is how much I love that at the end of each section you have somatic exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more about that because it felt like when I was reading it, like I'm in a session with you
Oh, thank
and you're
you.
giving me things to do that I can process in multisensory ways. So, can you share a little more about that part?
Yeah.
Because I don't have any other, I read a ton of books in this field, and this was
Mm-hmm.
the first one that I've read like that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for appreciating that. Yeah. So each chapter ends with what I call tools for the journey, and they are drawn from therapy practices like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness based therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and then somatic based therapies to help you integrate your mind, body, heart, and soul. All four of those drawing attention to each tool draws attention to at least one, if not multiple, of those areas. So it did feel like something unique to offer in the book because it's sometimes books will also put out like a workbook or a journal, a few months after the book
Mm-hmm.
releases. And it felt a little bit like this book kind of combines the two. It's the book and it's like a workbook or journal too, because there's reflection questions throughout.
Mm.
There's like a quiz in the myths chapters, and then there's those tools in each chapter. So I did want it to feel like a session with me, even though, of course, a book can never replace professional therapy. But I did want it to be like this is accessible to people who can't
Of
afford
course.
therapy or coaching, like you can spend $15 or so on a book and get a lot of bang for your buck with those tools that the book provides.
Well, I loved it, and I think it's incredibly unique. I guess one of my last questions, I don't want to keep you here too long, and I know we keep having internet glitches, which makes it less than fun, but I wanted to kind of wrap up with this may be a stacked question, and you can answer it however you want. But if you had dream goals for readers who are recovering from purity culture, what would your dream be for them to take away from this? I'll just not stack. I'll just ask them one at a time.
Okay. Yeah. I think healing is the word that comes to mind. I really want readers to take away that they feel healing in their mind, body, heart, and soul from reading the book. And that could look different ways for different people. It could look like less shame. It could look like more peace in their faith. It could look like better intimacy in their marriage. It could look like just a restored connection to themselves, to their own body. And so, yeah, I would say healing would be my biggest dream, my biggest wish for people reading the book.
Yeah, I love that. And this year, there have been some really good books coming out on sexuality, purity culture, different forms of healing. I love that my healthy bookshelf is getting bigger than my dumpster fire red tag hazard materials bookshelf.
Yeah.
So I have my bonfire bookshelf, and then I have my recommend bookshelf. And this year has been really good for my recommend bookshelf.
Great.
But if there were things that you would like to see recovering from purity culture make an impact on shifting the conversation about healthy sexuality, about healing, what kind of conversation shift are you dreaming for this book to have?
Wow, that's a good question.
Ongoing.
Yeah.
Where do you think the conversation should head next?
I have not really thought about that, Sarah. That's a great question. I think because I'm a therapist, I do look more like interpersonal and more individual. Like this book is for individual healing. I don't think as much about like systemic and more those kinds of issues, but that's a part of this too. That purity culture is an individual issue and a systemic one that has to be addressed in the greater context. Yeah. And I think we're both friends and fans of Sheila Gregoire, and I think she's done so much work when it comes to the systemic change, like the broader cultural change in the conversation. So what needs to come next? I would say we need more healthy resources that emphasize emotional health without losing your faith. I think so many of us are trying to hold on to our faith and our identity as Christians amidst so many toxic teachings and so much systemic, just toxic garbage in the church, with sexual abuse scandals that just never seem to end. There's always another one. And the way that the church collectively has responded to racism. There's just so many issues that have caused people to leave the church. The way that historically the church has treated LGBTQ people, there's just so many reasons to leave the church, but we need more healthy resources and conversation about what is really the heart of Jesus and the heart of a Christian faith. Those things that bring death is not Christianity. That's not of Jesus. So I love that your healthy bookshelf is getting bigger. And I love that more and more Christian books are being written that have thick endnotes. I have so many pages of endnotes. I spent days and days on these endnotes, and I'm like, 2 people are going to read these, if
and I would be one of them.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think there's 20 pages now that I'm looking at it, 20 pages of endnotes. And that just shows you the amount of, research that went into this. And we need more books like that have, this is actually
Right.
evidence-based. This is actually research. This is not just my personal opinion or even my personal story. Of course, there's a time and place for personal stories and those memoir type books. And I love those books too. But when we're looking at a prescriptive nonfiction kind of book, and that just means more of like a how-to or self-help type book, it needs to be based on more than just the person has 5 kids and has been married 30 years. Like, it needs to be, this some
Right.
research, and there's some signs of this is healthy and this is factual and not just that person's opinion.
Yes.
So, mhm.
Yes. Yes. No, I completely agree. Oh, excuse me, please. Sorry. Mm. Completely agree. And I was sitting there listening as you're describing this process of trying to cling to your faith, and in the middle of all of these scandals and everything. And I laugh now that nearly a decade ago, a radio show host was absolutely convinced that the beginning of the Me Too movement would be a flash in the pan and would be another 10-day news cycle, because it's not anywhere close to being done. Like and now it's church too, and holding people accountable who've been exploiting and preying on innocent and vulnerable individuals without any pushback for so long. And I got this mental picture of the process of trying to almost like taking your faith, and if it were a tablet, not an iPad tablet, but like tablets of stone, like if you're an archaeologist and you're trying to rinse off what's been carved into this tablet so that you can like cleanse it and get the dirt off to get down to the meat of what is actually substantial. It feels like trying to rinse that in a sewer drain. Like, we are trying to get down to what is the reality of Jesus, especially when it comes to relationships, sexuality, family structure, these kinds of things, the things that impact our daily life. But so much of the time, we're trying to clean off the substance in a sewer drain. And everything that we're reaching for to try to wash it clean and look at it clearly is actually just adding more toxic sludge on top of it. And I love the materials coming out that are a fresh, clean stream of water.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just trying to put a Band-Aid on the problem either. It's like, let's really dig to the bottom of this. And we have to extract the patriarchal beliefs that really underlie purity culture. It's a much more complex process than it seems, I think, the healing process. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you have coming next? The book is about to drop. You've got some really exciting stuff coming. Can you share that? What can people get involved with, and how can they be part of this?
Yeah. Well, the book comes out October 15th, Recovering from Purity Culture, but you can pre-order it now. And when you pre-order it, you get the audiobook for free, which is a great bonus to have, especially if you like audiobooks and like kind of having both. And then you also get a downloadable workbook so that you can journal and write. You get a discussion guide and guided meditations where I lead you through the mindfulness exercises in the book. So those are all the pre-order bonuses. And then everybody's invited to this webinar that Sheila Gregoire is hosting for me, and Rebecca, her daughter. They're hosting a webinar for me to celebrate the release of the book and to talk about some of these things about like, where are we going next? What's the future of this purity culture conversation? And that is going to be the day before the book releases. So it's Monday, October 14th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I can give you the link to
Send me the link. And
there you go.
Send me the registration link, and I am going to drop this into the chat. So guys, if you are interested in this, here is the free webinar with Sheila and Rebecca from their marriage.
Yes. Yeah, it's free, it's
And
virtual, it's gonna be kind of a fun, like, launch party slash conversation
that's
about
awesome.
research and what's coming next, and we'll do some giveaways, and yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. It's a nice way to celebrate
Fabulous.
virtually. Yeah.
Yes. So we can all join you for a virtual book launch celebration, even if we don't live near where you are.
Yes.
And if you're watching right now, I want to make sure that you have seen in the comments, there's your pre-order link where you can grab it on Amazon, get all of those bonuses. And as far as the rankings and so on, every pre-order is a big deal for an author who's launching a book. So I want to encourage you to do that for Camden and support her that way. If you want a couple of copies, pre-order them and drop ship some of them to friends or family who would use it, who need it. Get a couple of copies for your local library to grab their copy or five, and maybe go in and take some of Sheila's hazard materials tags, put those on the bonfire books in your church library, and put like 3 of Camden's books in on that shelf so people have some healthy options.
Yeah.
And then you can grab information on her Substack. We did an interview together for the book months ago,
Mhm.
and that one went up Substack today.
Yes.
So also tell friends. Women's ministries leader, if you are in church, and if you're not active in a church, no judgment from us. Bring a couple of friends who also are trying to figure all of this out for themselves, and maybe make a girls' night of it. Your snacks and some yummy, and just join in together.
Mhm.
I think it's a great way to support Camden, support Sheila and Becca, be involved in just being part of this tidal wave that's rising
Mhm.
of
Yeah, I think
healthy material.
that's what's really most important to me. It's nice and I thank people for their support of me and my book, but when you pre-order healthy resources, it shows publishers that there's a demand for these kinds of books because unfortunately, toxic books are still getting published every day, and those same kinds of stereotyped and just harmful teachings are still getting put out there every day. So I think when people pre-order, it's a vote. It's like saying to
Mhm.
publishers, bookstores, and gatekeepers that I vote for this kind of resource. And so that's what matters most to me is that we
Yes.
have more resources like this from people who don't always get a chance to write because they don't have the big platform. I'm a small platformed author and this is my first book. So yeah, so I appreciate that too, like just the larger kind of change we can make in the publishing industry.
It's always about the money, right? Follow the money trail. We can say we want different resources all we want, but if we want them to listen, buy the books. Alrighty. Well, Camden. Oh,
Thank you for having me and for agreeing to host this conversation and also
there we
for contributing like what you did to the book, just talking with me about abuse so that I could be sensitive to that. So thank you for hosting this conversation and the work that you do and to bring attention to these issues too.
Well, thank you. I love that there are so many of us covering areas from each of these different niches.
Right.
None of us could cover all of it. And
Yeah, we're not all experts in everything. So it's good to be able to partner with each other
can't
and
be.
collaborate and refer to each other and yeah, share each other's work. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being here with me today and for writing the book. I mean, this is a massive baby being birthed
Yeah.
and so much research and effort. So, everyone who's watching, you have all the links. And if you want to contact Camden, grab the book, ask her any questions you may not have wanted to drop publicly. You have her Substack, you have her website, and all of the information so that you can get in touch with her and follow up if there's anything else that you want to know. Camden, thank you so much for being here and joining me today. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to see you, Sarah.
You
Bye.
too. Bye bye, everybody.